Welcome to the hidden story of Alaska's Dark Pyramid.
It is a little-known but well-documented fact that UFO landing reports, close encounters by eyewitness on the ground and in the air, and unusual physical effects can all be caused by radiant ion engine-powered satellite plume probes used in conjunction with long-range fringe research projects. Many sightings are traceable directly to these ingenious and silent military devices, which have been successfully dismissed, denied, and debunked as spacemen. This is especially true for the popular reports of dogfighting between jet fighters and buzzing outer space UFO spaceship invaders. The government itself has conclusively established a very sound and healthy working relationship with this very flexible, historically documented terrestrial technology. Many detailed witness-respondent interpretations and explanations must be scientifically rejected in the search for valid, rational contingencies of all explanations. One very important explanation for the eyewitness misinterpretation of an act that for 27 years has been very effective in diverting and distracting investigation is undoubtedly this groovy cover story, currently offered to the tiny Earth community by the sole World Global Council power, twittering in the midst of broad international revival intentions for Mental Retardation Day, the very proud and noble Air Force, successfully lighting the way to intellectual citizenship for inhospitable Stone Age cavemen, officially since liable to those whom it proudly, with true bravado, serves at the breathtaking speed of sound.
Crisis after crisis. Absolutely the last and preferably only resort. As a matter of capability to all Earth peoples, whether they like it or not. Happiness could never have existed without true greatness on Earth. The almighty Dragon Lady is undoubtedly, independently rumored to be capable of heralding the dubious advent of and remaining very quiet within her den in the deep recesses of a very cold rock. Thank heavens for a low altitude visible for everyone in the Cold War year. Peace in our times. If you are very inventive enough, you might wonder about the official money it's going to cost you this time. Count the pennies. At the end, double your bets. Be sure to send us your money or other earthly goods as well. It should make us all feel really much better. Norway's saga aside, at the Ring of Self-Respectable Weight headquarters, we won't even bother you or make fun of you, but we will certainly reject jocular attempts made by a corny nomenclator and a nithe nitwit to put one over on Stone Age cavemen of Earth kind in a mature world culture package. Tickets cost more at the door and stay the same in the outhouse. In the fullness of time, the almighty game of life will be honorably completed due to the mental metamorphosis of those responsive beings involved in the creation of a rationale contingency scheme of things. The moving solutions to the fulfillment of the living narrative in the final liberation service cycle have been predestined, endowed, and authenticated. Thanks be to Zeus. Peace, goodwill, and tranquility be with all mankind. The people of the United States do not effectively control a massive military organization that operates largely in secret in a world that is largely peaceful. This secret government is the central nervous system of the national security state, a bureaucracy that serves as an electronic surveillance machine of awesome efficiency. To fund this machine and, at the same time, maintain its essential secrecy, the government has established a fourth branch within the orbit of the public state, a series of interlocking, heavily guarded, and strictly controlled strongboxes. In these compartments, no matter what may happen on the jobs, basic policy and intelligence must be kept secret. In many areas, even the budget totals and individual budget figures must be kept secret. This branch is known as the black budget, and it enjoys a certain immunity from standard political and economic requirements. Relatively few people understand its methods and systems. Fewer still understand how immunity can be limited. For reasons of national security, secrecy, and lack of budgetary control, the budget totals of these departments have never been audited. In essence, they constitute a world of their own, a hidden and self-contained world that may, if unchecked, threaten the world of constitutional checks and balances, political planning, and democratic decision-making. The main objectives of the investigation, then, are to diligently present the full details of what can only be a collective defense disinformation leak, despite the likely failure of the Quadrum, to identify some other items disclosed in recent military cover stories in Alaska, and to suggest reasons for recent shifts in military attitudes casting Congress in the role of a new soft target. Various regions are the focus of different Pentagon defense groups shielded to a greater or lesser degree by the cover of exercise handbooks. Since the selection bias imposed by working with these sources makes up the list, it is planned to give a definition of this questionable category in a separate section. Local sources of identical information are used first, and regards back to previous stories. Before concluding this section, it is important to outline the plan of the article. Here, it seems actually possible, for the first time, to make note of the considerable differences between the cover information leaked to the two classes of readers. Their position, if placed within the narrative, necessarily depends upon the proper setting of the remaining shocks. First, some technical background is presented in the following section, and some because of the heavy classification problem dealt with. Conceptually, the presentation is consistent, although in many instances, the sources describe the items in question as unauthorized leaks. The differences are quite substantial, with the sources being a mixed bag. The history and influence of the Bohemian Grove. Summer encampment located in the heart of California's Sonoma County Redwood Enclave, the Bohemian Grove has played host to the Bohemian Club's vacationing elite for over a century. The first camping party was held in the summer of 1879 by Edwin F. Sawyer and several other San Francisco businessmen. Since 1893, however, the club has occupied the 2,200-acre property on a continuous basis. The summer encampment is a storybook stereotype of Americana. While the club's collective resume includes an extraordinary array of accomplishments, the encampment is associated with terms such as secret gathering and elite. The camp is noted for its 19th century atmosphere and its amenities. Hundreds of male guests, always carefully chosen, are housed in comfortable redwood cabins. Mountain paths are lined with burlap, and guests are chauffeured from colourful play to entertainments in a carriage-circled amphitheatre. Periodically, however, the swells squirreled away at the Bohemian Grove have managed to ignore their business and have stepped into the light of sometimes unwelcome attention. An account of a 15th anniversary celebration for President Herbert Hoover notes that it so happened the celebration fell a year after the 1929 crash, and with puns unwittingly in bad taste, I pointed out the fact to then Walter Teague, scenic designer, at the banquet. "You might as well tell us the plans for the next stock market crash," Teague replied. 14 years later, the Russian spy scandal, which was to receive national attention, was announced by the pre-announcement of the Bohemian Grove as alternative nuclear summer retreat for the US president, when the regular Camp David retreat was felt to offer insufficient security. The United States has a long history of secret military installations in the frozen north. Since the late 1940s, the Department of Defense has covertly tested the effects of atomic warfare in the Great Barrens of Alaska. Tens of thousands of boxcars and cargo containers of surplus and obsolete weapons have been stockpiled within the country's largest park. During the Cold War, the United States secretly trained its troops for Arctic warfare at a cost of millions of dollars spent acquiring land and developing bases. In the 1950s, President Eisenhower signed an order that would have allowed the United States to use these installations without the permission of the then Danish government. A highly classified section of the Alaska International Airport area operates diverted commercial flights and military charters at will, under cover of civil disaster emergency relief. After a typhoon decimated the US airbase at Clark Field, the Department of Defense relocated a crack squadron 1,800 miles south to the Ski-Lac Loop woodland on the Kenai Peninsula and covered it in a guise of workers' shanties left over from the construction of the Alaska Highway. It built an arsenal of hidden guns, missiles, and atomic traps at Indian Mountain. In a cost overrun of over 1,000%, it constructed a secret, underground city in the Chugach Mountains, southwest of Anchorage. Today, most of these secluded state-of-the-art facilities lay nearly abandoned as silent, vacant haunts of our military's furtive past. Commonwealth outposts in the quiet reaches of the Alaskan bush. The distant early warning line was still 5 years in the future, but the Soviet threat from over the North Pole was real. President Truman visited at the urging of George Marshall to establish US policy that would understand it and cultivate a healthy new nation. A series of colossal research projects followed with little significance to the armed forces. They were Prime Argus, the largest on-site thermonuclear explosion in history, an effort to discover methods of destruction without radioactivity, and the motion picture weapons effects test that generated the birth of EME. The North Slope oil strike came into view, followed by the 6th power plant proposal. Federal investment in Alaskan power development and military construction had thus risen to heroic levels by the date of the earthquake called the Turnagain Arm by the Russian explorers. Alaska had become a very mobile territory. The Cold War was not just a skillfully manipulated piece of psychological imperialism. It was not something that had been orchestrated by the weapons industry or the generals and admirals at their portside games. The clash of ideologies was the result of hard diplomacy. Behind the Iron Curtain lay a cynical, bomb-conscious foe of formidable capabilities with a historic pattern of territorial aggression. Both our allies and the US War Department feared only one thing: a Third World War. At present, there is no question that there are missing fragments to the Alaska story. It is certainly possible that various people would lie and cover up evidence pointing to direct evidence of alien intelligence and space travelers. Our regular space and moon activities and secrets would pale into near insignificance compared with having direct or indirect communications with an alien civilization. There is good evidence in the public domain. Air and ground unidentified flying disc incidents provide the proof. We suggest an international panel of nuclear physicists be organized to convince scientists and citizens around the world that the indirect evidence is strong enough to take real action to observe and communicate with the alien occupants. Our purpose here is to suggest strategies for action and to separately explore largely human and a few natural alternatives. One can speculate that if the research and development equipment and facilities really exist, there would be no need to spend billions of dollars for a gigantic high-energy particle accelerator and associated detector systems. A straight-line 64-mile collider along the California coastline for avoiding federal jurisdiction problems has already been privately funded. Such a collider system should have no difficulty detecting Higgs bosons and newly predicted W particles. The high-energy quadratic world would eventually raise the stakes in the arms race to the dissolution of other economic motives. The end of investing in building and renewing bombers, missiles, particle accelerators, lasers, optical, XUV, and gamma-ray beams and their shielded launchers. It definitely means the end of secrecy and national and world repression. The end of the British guardians of Branchell Wood following UFOs in mushroom-shaped cloud potato masher basket cables. We suggest enormous distressing, Earth-effective, and universal effect anthropological problems. If Bill and the Alaskans are correct and a vast international UFO cover-up does exist today, then just how could such an outrageous and seemingly improbable task be accomplished? Historically, the military prototypes of the Dark Pyramid, the shapes and formations of armies, spies, conspirators, and cheats have been part of humanity's survival strategy itself. That all these different pyramids mirror each other suggests that the UFO controversy has, for some time now, become little more than a gigantic international game. Governments play the game very seriously, but they play it to survive, and always in ways they hope their citizens will overlook. What is the evidence for the murky existence of a dark pyramid that has emerged surrounding the great 20th century controversy over flying saucers? The avowed estrangement of both governmental police blotters and the editorial departments about looking into UFOs is a story in itself. But other telltale signs are about too. The international aspects of the UFO mystery are particularly revealing. And increasingly too, the UFO story leads directly back to the secret world, towards strange military operations and theories, even toward the empires of top secret. From available evidence, some of it circumstantial to be sure, it can be expected that HAARP has three main purposes. 1. Earth-penetrating tomography of the upper atmosphere and ionosphere. The second base of this kind can raise the created electromagnetic field to the needed level without covering the whole state territory. This is also to be used when State Department functionary visits a foreign country. These facilities need additional amplification of the field, and therefore the Institute conducts carrying out work into the possible ways of raising this field. Among such methods is an increase of the power in transmission aerials by means of attachment of the small-size power sources in their crowns. 2. Gauging of the electromagnetic field of Mars. Military experiments in Earth's ionosphere are scarcely possible to be taken out since they are not suited for an explanation for the population, and, on the contrary, they are likely to stimulate the demonstration of numerous inexplicable atmospheric plasmoids, such as those which have provided increasingly numerous sightings. Permanent bases like those created by Russia at many of the lighthouses in our country erase the need for permanently, throughout many years, inhabited stations. The situation in Alaska is particularly fascinating. Military personnel informally claim that strange or extra-legal activities go on in the vicinity of the radar installation all of the time. However, when individuals undertake the extraordinary step of attempting to lodge an official complaint there, those individuals are rebuffed, and the entire official process is treated with icy disdain. Questions may be asked as to what the exact nature of the secret collaboration is. But it is obvious that the process involves government and military collusion with what the Military Operations Manual euphemistically refers to as a UFO type of incident. However, questions may be asked as to what the exact nature of and the participants in this secretive collaboration are. Although there is a lot of bandying of the term UFO, it is obvious to all concerned that the term is not particularly descriptive, revealing, or significant. It is obvious not only from the radar data, abundantly confirming recorded eyewitness testimony, but also from the prevailing assumptions as to the capabilities of the objects in question, that these are not piloted vehicles from elsewhere in our universe. Some witnesses have even indicated that the large triangles morphed into UFOs, or comet-like UFOs, an observation strikingly reminiscent of and consistent with the phenomenon's ongoing ability to suggest a subtle intelligence. We asked whether certain information essential for his hypothesis could have been gained, and testimony indicated that disinformation activities included taking credit for cattle mutilations imitating extraterrestrial technology. Testimony also revealed that such information about secret experimental equipment was given with the intention of discrediting an individual. The application of masking substances that fluoresced under UV light had been discussed by various military scientists in connection with potential uses as self-destruction mechanisms in the event of the swift loss of drone control. The disclosure substantiated masking activities with the intriguing and correct disclosure of the substances used. The chances for a hoax now approach zero. More definitive testimony from others in the management team was not obtained. All were less forthcoming, and this is most understandable because there are now decided advantages to those involved in limiting knowledge of base personnel in order to limit further complicating leaks. When two separate teams of scientific intelligence officers were placed in agreement with the conclusions, authority for action was immediately available. It is not fair to hold certain individuals to a higher standard than that to which we hold persons, like judges, prosecutors, and police officers, who must work so closely and at times so discreetly with organized crime figures. Of one thing we can be certain: if the military's involvement in pyramid construction is accurately described, then such excavation and reconstruction is perceived as vitally important, probably as or more important than any military construction activities existing or projected within the United States itself. We share caution about the potential implications if these pyramidal or shell-dimensional structures are connected with some death-dealing contrivance, some heat beam, or lethal microwave device. The reality and consequences are indeed sobering. Given the military phobia with portable solar concentrators and the philosophy regarding expenditures, it would seem the presence of a portable solar concentrator, which could far exceed any microwave diathemy in cookout capability, would further unbalance the military's already distorted R&D budget allocations. A private telephone company is routinely maintaining switchboard facilities. Reports indicate air taxi service providing cargo service, from which this same private airline would bring back to the US heavy amounts of illicit drugs. Substantial American military hardware, some of it very sophisticated, is arriving via the Alaska corridor and is suspected of processing for shipment. Suspicion has now increased to the extent that all flights must be rerouted or made to submit to drastic inspections. We know of one aircraft from Alaska that was not allowed to enter Canada after it had declared it was returning to the US. After 2 days of delay and stern warnings, it was shipped to the normal American processing facility by way of Seattle and North Bay. Investigative journalism is part of the scientific research process. It requires careful observation of the facts. Also, like scientific research, investigative journalism must have a solid factual foundation that requires verification to integrate into what passes for scientific knowledge. Investigative journalism is only as good as the verification of its underlying facts. Of course, reportage on controversial topics may trigger demands for greater explanation and accountability than regular science when debunking takes place. Since its inception, investigative journalism has played a critical role in holding individuals in government and business accountable, and in providing citizens with accurate and useful information. Over time, the genre became the target of powerful special interests who accused it of lacking a factual basis, of readiness to leap to conclusions, and of pursuing personal vendettas. Nonetheless, there is immeasurable value in what trustworthy and credible investigative journalism has delivered over time. Problems loomed large when we started this story. We knew the Department of Defense couldn't be forthcoming because the subject matter this story raises is too sensitive. We knew their collaboration with Japan was secret, and both must be worried that incredibly stupid doings would be exposed. We knew the budget was unpublicized, that there was no authorization, that Congress in its oversight role probably knew next to nothing of the project. We also knew no US environmental statute permitted national security or defense exemptions. None allowed the military to avoid all responsibility for essential upfront environmental impact review and compliance as a project got underway. FDR had long ago instructed in the secrets game, however, stating it to be necessary to protect the route from unfriendly incursions. He ordered suppression of weather reports per day. Late in life, he told a photographer, "Act of God, my eye." Those were ordnance explosions. No other disaster in recorded history has been marked by such indifference. Word was kept. Only in the last years has an emerging challenge caused any ripples here. A naval historian wrote on the latter-day successor to the Lorada, and the story ran serially in a local newspaper decades later. No follow-up, no review of the official evidence followed either report. Facts forgotten seem never to have occurred. Likewise, President Carter's Mother's Pacific is a region whose lessons have gone up in the fogs of the Kuriles or the deep coral of the Pacific. Two clearly defined patterns were found. First, the military operations and civilian conglomerates who receive the most derisive attention from protesters have close national security links that extend into some of the darkest areas of military research. Second, the occurrence of both the military and their corporate civilian compliances together in Alaska was a surprise growth story due primarily to exploiting a small group of military stimuli that should have been more apparent. Of the 3 internally studied collections, Loral has a surprising combination of defense and military attributes. It can boast of 2 decades of experience in developing military and defense systems. Loral's defense products include non-defense commercial space systems that it will use in selected military projects. With its own space laboratories developed independently of military funding, Loral will rely on external research and development for a significant technology boost in frequencies, signal propagation, data processing, and communications payload subsystems. The cover story elicited an elaborate, if typically vague, response from the Defense Department. I hope readers will take a close look at the letter, carefully examining both what it says and perhaps, even more importantly, what it does not. The letter gives a bland and often evasive or irrelevant reaction to the substance of the stories about the enormous Mataga Dome. In other words, the things it claims to refute do not cover the important matters in those stories. For instance, the letter affirms that there have been ground radar installations at Shemya, just as was suggested by one of the persons referred to, and these are of course well known. That there might still be an old, declassified radar on the island does not deal with the questions raised by the upgrading of it in the 1960s and the continuing security operations in the same area at the same time. We are all quite aware of orbiting satellites providing information to our military and would not be too surprised if there were smaller missions from the same platform on a zigzag schedule. How, in fact, would anyone be able to prove or disprove such claims? The denied billowing cloud observation was not a reconnaissance satellite, agreed, but could provide a similar kind of information, as useful at times as what those satellites give. And, just in case our immediate predecessors were deceived or mistaken, such a reconnaissance use would be of an entirely different and more hazardous nature than that of a civilian-sounding rocket. The CIA has categorically and convincingly denied the existence of an undisclosed subculture of the militarization and modification of weather. The Department of Defense has given similarly firm, persuasive, and highly detailed denials. According to officials charged with ensuring against infringement on the rights of Americans protected in the Constitution, the purported secret pyramid on Arctic superweapon development is without any factual foundation. These same officials exercise full authority and influence over the organization's cousin organization, the National Security Agency. As representatives of both Congress and the director of the CIA have indicated, that latter entity has powers restricted to searching out and establishing the existence of foreign intelligence activities aimed at much more highly classified US concerns. Such a secret could not survive 5 minutes, let alone 25 years. The logical conclusion: given the combined and individual credibility of so many independent sources, the pyramid does not exist. The Secretary of Defense offered assurances against a secret, pyramid-level record of Arctic storms being caused, intensified, or directed for United States military purposes. Classified material can only be generated, relied on, or otherwise used within the context of programs authorized and funded by the United States Congress, upon proposals made by the government to the representatives of American citizens as the elected spokespersons of those same citizens who provide the resources to make it a reality. The President of the United States and his closest national security and foreign policy advisors, who represent the individuals concerned about the country's future, decide the proper levels of such authorization, health, and public safety. The intelligence community principally ensures that Congress has knowledge of those secret activities, and the President provides unique authorities over the exercise of such classified knowledge or muscle employed. Mutual space-based observation and information acquisition are characteristic of bilateral and multilateral cooperation in many areas of intelligence and security. There were no secrets about certain activities ordered by a commander-in-chief, whose words and actions, during a non-stop campaign in full public view in the 1991 war, convinced many anti-war groups that they deserved backing with military strategy and tactics. If the nation trusts General Schwarzkopf with knowledge that the suggestion had to have been made, it would classify some deadly cerium in a Colorado winter's graveyard. An operation could quite simply not have happened. There's no question that policy changes of a major and far-reaching nature would be involved in a repeal of the plans and program guidelines for the BESF. A change in secrecy policy, government-sponsored or commercial fabrication or purchase of the system with an eye towards open scientific use of all the collected data, partnership in funding and senior management of the mission with several agencies, and significant change in military geophysical interpretation programs. Only the technical level of the military electrojet control system would be left unchanged. Disclosure may involve a less violent process. I believe there is enough public evidence of the mechanisms that I have discussed so far that they may already have begun development of the alternative measurement concept commercially, if I had not stumbled onto the program last May. Available archival data from other coincident bistatic radar experiments will reinforce the disclosure and eliminate most of the imposed ambiguity in readaptation of the technique to other limited power resources. Public awareness is crucial to stopping the military abuse of the environment. As long as the military believes the public is apathetic, they will consider environmentalists and native land protectors the only obstacles in the way of yet another bombing mission, tank maneuver, or weather control experiment. Awareness tactics must be refined, challenging journalists heeding the military's request to keep environmental truths silent for reasons of national security. Withholding the truth from the public may feed a military agenda, but eventually the environmental impact of a single-time mission gone awry will focus public attention on Alaska's military activities with a vengeance. The issue can't afford to wait for that to happen. All over the country, there are those who wish to join the protest, boycott, or divestment movement, but they are not even aware of the existence of Alaska's military activities. Asking that companies stop leasing to the Department of Defense is minimally effective without a broad-based public awareness of the offense. Restoring Alaska, and in fact, America, to its pristine condition is eventually everyone's wish. But for now, few people enjoy learning about the high cost of the rapidly evolving dark arts of environmental manipulation. It is essential that environmental awareness precede environmental impact, and public education dispels public apathy. The following comments address some of the media coverage that was generated by our earlier work. How various organizations and individual radio talk shows, newspapers, and wire services view the subject of UFOs and related issues was evident by their responses, or lack of response, to that work. More media personnel in the United States had called the Prestons, myself, or other members of the group leading up to or during that conference on this event than any other in the history of MUFON. Many made rescinding offers of coverage when they discovered that there was more to the story than was apparent by a superficial reading of the distributed abstract. At best, a journalist who had traveled up from California certainly did receive credit for an observation that only a portion of the waves from the area need display an unusual commonality for it to be meaningful, as opposed to 100% during one of his presentations. By no means could it be said that there was a lack of interest by the media in general. Rather, legitimate or not, it was in seeing that what they personally expected to be there. At the MUFON conference, the reception was quite different after the paper was given. Articles, wire stories, and reports appeared in numerous papers. An opportunity to be heard by over 60 radio talk shows was offered, and some of the material wound up televised. And though there are no illusions among any of the paper's 3 authors about the accuracy of media coverage, the almost total absence of any worthwhile criticism concerning the content of the paper was equally remarkable. False, misleading paranormal claims. No, news is good news. This writer has had considerable experience with the media and the subject of UFOs by sensitively visiting an entirely different area in which everyone knows the subject to be hopelessly beyond the realm of scientific credibility. Paranormal claims in science. Based on the frequent observations of contrails generating unusual clouds, or persisting for many hours, and the sample evidence of potentially toxic particle residues, several community groups coalesced across North America to monitor and study this new atmospheric phenomenon. These so-called chemtrail or skywatch units employ a range of analytical tools such as meteorological and performance observation, ground spectroscopy, and noxious residue sampling. The growing repository of data, hypotheses, and theories on the aerosol operations now serves as a platform for discussion. The Alaska Weathermen Unit began to explore the possible connection between ground earthquakes and weather control operations, given the frequent observation of the aerosol trails just before or just after significant quakes. Organizations feature discussions aggregating many conspiracy theories about government projects. In addition to the web, the internet and chat bodies along the actual trail sites are generated to rapidly share evidence and to facilitate the analysis of the conspiracy. Portugal, one of the major NATO countries, believes that a good offense is the strongest defense. The United States converted most of the Azores government's local expenses into US dollars. This made the Azores government more dependent on the United States. The US Air Force promised training flights of American planes over the Azores, even at night in the landing area, over the objection of the top Air Force officials who believed that such training would only dilute the perception of a real incursion by the Russians against mainland Spain and Portugal. This reduced the probability that the Azores population would feel compelled to ask the Americans for protection. The Air Force agreed to reduce the training flights for a while, but did not, by a spoken agreement, promise not to fly at night at some later time. This was a way of hedging if an unexpected international situation arose when the periodic agreement came up for renewal. The United States has a formal agreement among NATO countries to impose an economic blockade on Portugal when and if the country took more steps towards nationalization of big businesses that other conservative-oriented socialist political parties have taken, and which the Portuguese Communist Party and the Portuguese extreme left were advocating. The United States made a severe miscalculation in this regard. The Portuguese recognized that eventually a coalition of all political party factions will nationalize most of the big businesses essential for day-to-day life in Portugal. The Azores population and the Azores and Portugal governments that will be elected are distrustful of the possibly traitorous actions of the right-wing stooges in Portugal. Beyond our government, military, or intelligence thrusts, which evolve in partnership with colleagues in such countries as Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Britain, many other countries provide the outside component of our particular pyramid of intelligence and military achievement. Sounding impressive enough? From 60 to 70 allied countries whose representatives, in particular their intelligence officers, frequent many of our top secret installations and advise with the help of their sagas. But beyond and above this vast alliance, there exists that elusive international shadow, which shrouds the greater part of the CIA and other governmental practices, customs, traditions, and business. Instances of CIA rogue behavior within other host countries are not particularly unknown. Such actions are occasionally given a brief summary in foreign publications and generally disappear as fleetingly as they might appear. In brief, any special review of CIA shenanigans occurring on United States soil by representatives of our various friendly and unfriendly countries can hardly be expected to surface. The implications of the existence of the Dark Pyramid are so profound that the disclosure, at any level of the tightly held secret, will seriously affect all United States foreign policy, including relations with foreign allies and Stalinist Russia. It is extremely difficult to predict what disclosures could be made that would cause the United States to discard the policy that the Alcan Highway ends at Fairbanks. Certainly, the construction of new United States military bases, forcibly announced, secret or guessable because of the reinforcement of those existing, would be highly embarrassing in the face of the oft-repeated promise that they were being closed. American disillusionment with Russia for her own world, politics reasons could become even sharper. Korean jitters could become worse in the unlikely event that the Dark Pyramid became a hot stink bomb. The necessary support of Western Europe with Western world resources, meeting facilities in the port of Northern Darkness, could be seriously compromised. Such a list could be compiled on a niggling 2-brigade scale where the port facility would be of minor importance, or where the port facility was of major importance. The policy producing this kind of grand tension, or little kiss of death perverseness, stands on feet of expansionary military and industrial complex lusts, rather than on the best judgments of Alaska's nice people. In considering the Alaska Pyramid, it became clear that some serious ethical and legal limitations to reporting existed because of the discovery methodology used and some of the intelligence concerns which the pyramid raised. We did look at responsibility. For lack of better data, entertain the possibility that the pyramid might simply evaporate as the result of some natural phenomena. Shortly following the construction, the pyramid was covered with soil, and the entire area was sacralized with religious ceremonies by skeptical peasants who opposed this government works project. The pilot, however, discovered the pyramid's effect while conducting maneuvers on the pyramid axis in a helicopter and helped convince the government that it was indeed dealing with a pyramid. It is not in contacting the pyramid itself, for the apparent band of silence has effectively been shattered. In fact, more information and a greater peace of mind can result from disclosing what is known. There are obvious and immediate concerns, military and logistical considerations, industrial considerations, and long-term moral and philosophical considerations. Nevertheless, it is possible that some far greater physical and philosophical power may be responsibly drawn from the pyramid. Prudence and caring are the key factors in any potentially beneficial discovery. At any rate, the reported speculation of the participants seems almost irrelevant in view of the actual construction at Alaska. Military development is a rather enigmatic process. The operating premise seems to be that the enemy must know as little as possible about how well prepared we are. To achieve this, a vast amount of secrecy surrounds contracts, research, tests, and operations. How the vast amount of money spent annually is allocated and spent is information that Congress is entitled to know in great detail. Instead, the major amount is wrapped in classified secrecy. Each service going in different directions makes all of this secrecy even more difficult to evaluate. It has been, however, a remarkably uniform theme over the years that personnel costs must be drastically curtailed. When this theme was sounded in the past, the comparative literature supported the idea of cutting personnel and especially infantry numbers, while omitting any suggestions to the highly expensive acquisition programs and installations in the homelands devoted to waging high-technology war. Those at the top have usually been walking the irreversible path. There is an old bromide that states, "If it isn't broken, why fix it?" The bromide answers, "In the Pentagon, if it isn't broken, break it so you have something to fix." The cover story of this issue focuses on some of the top components of the weapons and intelligence programs, especially in Alaska's Dark Pyramid. Government efforts to quiet domestic dissent and popular politics are subject to further analysis independent of the claims of the controlling interests propaganda system. Once again, the most logical and informative approach is to concentrate on institutional structures rather than on the personnel who hijack these institutions for their own purposes. The key to the curtailment of civil liberties is the subordination of popular institutions to autocratic systems. In turn, the power of the general population, even when it is somewhat organized, lies in such community organization as labor unions and the media, through which they express their concerns and defend their interests. A strong political party and democratic culture also operate to protect civil liberties. If the academic community and the general public remain largely passive, government will continue to engineer its collusive relationships, and American democracy will continue its spiral into an Orwellian world. Everything the definitive contributors of the past warned against and predicted is now actually happening. The preferential treatment for national security doctrines is eroding all the basic tenets of a free society. The media are well on their way to assuming a new propaganda role, and the defenders of the soldiers of industry are now trying to save America from the disaster they created. It will require significant broad-based efforts by different groups and organizations to reverse this trend towards autocracy and to revitalize the democratic processes. Kyle Bentley and I recognize that our findings are shocking and unsettling. It is not politically correct to question or criticize the US military and its actions. There are dangers involved in doing so. The increasing clumping together of the US military, corporations, and corrupt politicians into a monstrous world-devouring maw is truly frightening. The Alaska Triangle is an easy place to carry on secret, increasingly visible evil deeds. There may be just too much darkness at the heart of our national security. There are many really good people in the obviously necessary US military and world intelligence establishments. Our conclusion has to be that Alaska's secret nebulous triangular deception is treasonous. In order to act in a reliable and protective fashion, the US voting public needs to understand what those at the top of the secret pyramidal power structure must clearly know. Our concealed hypersonic testing makes us more secure in one small way, but in a great many surrounding ways, where we are not even bothered to provide a rationale. The United States becomes much less secure. These are the real state secrets, and they are being kept only to maintain the power, wealth, and autonomy of a small fleet of people who wear appropriate rewards and self-assigned badges, and come wizards by which to control us and our elected representatives. They are using the three-sided prism of ignorance, greed, and fear to bend the truth and conceal their control over majestic American air and Space Force power. The following chapter concludes an examination of military situations by consulting some of the country's most knowledgeable experts in the area. It then discusses possible cover-ups reported by researchers. A cumulative review of these government and expert findings appears at the end of this chapter. A separate chapter will present comments by, as well as interviews with, the researcher who was repeatedly cited by informants as most knowledgeable in these matters. Since these pages may sound more like a novel or a thriller, a footnote best describes the bond between our country's leading secret projects and the UFO mystery. To review, here are assertions from key informants, reported by us and contained in documents obtained and confirmed as authentic by independent official sources. These maintain that the US went to and established colonies at or near the North Pole in the 1950s with the help of alien intelligences. The construction of a stargate near the Russian flowering of civilization required a cover for such activities, so real stories were started, according to the document. A previous Stargate, or Celestial Gateway project in America, was destroyed with its participants at about the time Native Americans of the Adena culture were replaced by the Hopewell culture. This study has introduced and attempted to further explicate the complexities of Operation Landscape and electromagnetic arrays. It sought to describe the known arrays in Alaska and their purpose in national defense applications, describing in detail the high-frequency active auroral research program, the very low-frequency array, formerly at a location in Antarctica, and other arrays at various sites. The methods at these sites and their apparent incidence were encapsulated, and an overview of the relatively new field of ionospherics was provided, with practical military operational significance enunciated. While attempts have been made to validate the research work of some scholars in diverse fields, and to add new threads of information to these arrays and mission statements, much remains to be learned with possible impact upon future national and global electromagnetic policy. The research design of this paper was primarily a field survey study, with the researcher working alone or bringing a single friend. The survey studies departmental field sites along major trucking, boating, tourist and mountaineering trails, glacial and marine wildlife sites, and major transportation hubs. At each location, the research probe seeks visual, documentary, physical, academic, and oral data on signals, locations, array beams, institutions, technological development, and policy concerning electromagnetic operations as they may interact with tourists, truckers, and mountain climbers. Private military bases and their environs, embassy buildings, consulates, and strategic foreign and federal intelligence transportation hubs are issues for consideration. If fluffy white clouds made of water can reflect radio waves in ceramics, and crystals translationally translate those waves rather than absorb them as some kinds do. Microwave transmission trials for missile defense may have mission potential previously unforeseen. As with ions, other objects capable of moving and translating waves are impacted. Sunny, wind-whipped, glaciated areas are common places where they can be detected and studied.